Welcome everyone, fruits of the orchard. Tonight is Parshat Beshalach, and we're going to learn two different things. The first part is going to be about the Song of the Sea, and the second part is going to be the connection to the Haggadah. The Parsha and its connection to the Haggadah. So we're starting with the Song of the Sea. And in the lead up to the Israel crossing the sea, there are three verses, which I'll read to you in English, that all have 72 letters. There are three verses in a row that have 72 letters. This is considered statistically like one in, I heard once something like 4 million or something that you would have in a text, three verses in a row with 72 letters. From this phenomenon, which I'll explain more, we come up with 72 three-letter names of God. This is a very, very ancient Kabbalistic tradition that out of these three verses comes 72 three-letter names of God. And the way that it's done is a mystery. But this is what is handed down. And obviously, it was only handed down by those who received it with prophecy, with Ruach HaKodesh, that they could tell in these three verses that there were 72 three-letter names of God. And the way that it's done is by taking the first letter of the first verse, the last letter of the second verse, and the first letter of the third verse. That forms a three-letter name of God. And then it continues. The second letter of the first verse, the second last letter of the second verse, and the second letter of the third verse. And that will create the second three-letter name of God, until you go through all 72 letters. So for those who have a Chumash in front of you, it's in Exodus 14, verses 19 through 21. Again, Exodus 14, Shemot, Yud Daled, Yud Tet through Chaf Aleph, three verses. And in English, it says like this. Again, this is Israel in preparation to cross the sea. So it says, then the angel of God, who had been going in front of the Israelite camp, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved away from the front of them and stood behind them. So that is the first verse. The second verse is, and he came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud in the darkness, and it illuminated the night, and one did not draw near the other all night long. That is the second verse. And the third verse, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God led the sea with the strong east wind all night, and he made the sea into dry land, and the waters split. These are the three verses. I read them in English, from which we get 72 three-letter names of God. So let's delve into this a little bit deeper. So 72 is the numerical value of the word chesed, loving kindness, one of the 10 sfirot, the sphera that's associated with the right arm. Gevura is associated with the left arm. So already we have a deep illusion here that by God saving Israel, this was an expression of God's chesed, of his loving kindness, that he saved us. But what is actually amazing is if you add up the 3 verses, and each one has 72 letters, so 72 times 3 equals 216. 216 is the gematria of Gevura. So this is an incredible phenomenon that we have the idea of 72 3-letter names of God. 72 is the equivalent of chesed. Yet, if you put all 3 together, it equals Gevura. So this is telling us the nature of this miracle. That on one hand, what was chesed to Israel, the exact same act was Gevura to the Egyptians. And in the Tikkunei Zohar, it actually says that this phenomenon of 72 and 216 being engraved in these 3 verses is telling us the secret of the unity of chesed and gevura. So many times we tend to think of chesed and gevura as opposites. And in certain cases, they are opposites. But in their essence, they are coming from the same place. So for example, the sphere of Gevura is associated with the name Elohim. Elohim is the numerical value of the word HaTeva, nature, but like with a capital, the aspect of nature, HaTeva. So we learn that Gevura is manifest in this world in the laws of nature. The laws of nature are God's manifestation of Gevura. But when we really think about it, the laws of nature are the greatest chesed that God can do. Because without dependable, steady laws of nature, so there would be no existence, there would be no world, there would be no life, that we only are able to exist on this planet because of the immutable laws of nature. And yet here we see at the splitting of the Reed Sea that every general principle has an exception. And the exception to the laws of nature are what we call a miracle. When God, for reasons that only he knows and only, in a sense, he can deliver, he can transcend his own laws of nature when he deems it necessary. So here we have chesed and gevura engraved in these three verses. Now, in the Song of the Sea, 3 different times it talks about God's right hand, Yamin Hashem. And as we said, the right hand is chesed. And yet, all 3 times in the song, when it mentions the right hand, in a sense, it's talking about God's strength in creating this miracle, in saving the Jewish people, and in a sense, allowing or delivering judgment on the Egyptians for really everything that they had done to the Jews during our enslavement. So here, the right hand, which is usually connected to chesed and loving kindness, which of course God saving us is a manifestation. But here we see a unity between chesed and gevura, because the right hand is in a sense delivering gevura. And so as the Tikkunei Zohar says, we need to learn to see how, even though sometimes we can see chesed and gevura as opposites, the real truth is that they are unified in their source. It's like a triangle where at the top of the triangle they're unified, and then they manifest in this world many times as opposites. But we're always looking for the unity. And so this is the secret of the Shema. The Shema, we mention two names of God, Shema Yisrael, Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is always associated with God's mercy and compassion. And then Elokeinu, which is the plural of Elokim, our God, and not the plural, but meaning the possessive, our God. And so we have Hashem and Elokim right next to each other. And then we say Hashem Echad, God is one. And in the previous parsha, two parshas ago, Ve'era, so it begins by saying, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe, Lemor ani, Vayedaber Elokim el Moshe. Elokim speaks to Moshe and says, Ani Hashem, I am Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. So here we see, we'd ask, how does that work? If Elokim is speaking, why is he introducing himself, as it were, as Yud-Kei Vav-Kei? But that is the unity that we say in the Shema every day. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Even though these names in this world sometimes manifest as opposites, in their essence, they are absolutely united. And this we see in a beautiful gematria, that the gematria of Elokim, 86, equals Kli Hashem, the Kli, the vessel of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. In other words, the vessel of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is manifest through Elokim. So this is a very a deep allusion to the unity of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and Elokim. And we have another verse that says, Shemesh u'magen Hashem Elokim. The sun and its shield is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei Elokim. So how do we understand that? The Shemesh represents the source of light. That's Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. That's Hashem is, as it were, like the sun, radiating light and warmth. But we know that the rays of the sun, if they're not properly shielded, would actually destroy the world. And that's all the talk about the ozone and climate control and fossil fuels. All has to do with this shield, that shielding the negative parts of sunlight and allowing the positive to come through. But that becomes an allegory, a metaphor for the relationship between Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and Elokim. And so all of this is alluded to in the fact that there are 3 verses in a row that have 72 letters. But again, and that's chesed, 72 is chesed, but when you add them up, it comes to 216, which is gevura. Now, we have something very, very interesting, because the next week's Torah portion is Yitro. That's when we receive the Torah. And the Parsha of Yitro has exactly 72 verses. So again, we see that the giving of the Torah is alluding to, this is the greatest gift, the greatest kindness that God could do to the Jewish people in the entire world, is by giving us the Torah. And so it's not a coincidence that Parshat Yitro has 72 verses. It's very intrinsic to the meaning of the giving of the Torah. But here we have the same, as it were, paradox that we're talking about, that in different circumstances, we have different names for God. In the Torah itself, there are different names for God. And the more we understand about the different names of God, we understand why that name is chosen to appear in this verse, or in this story, or by this mitzvah. But along with the names of God, there's also ways that we refer to God. Different ways we refer to God. One that we've talked about before is hamakom. That sometimes we refer to God as the place. Sometimes we refer to God as the merciful one. But the sages coined a phrase in which to relate to God in the giving of the Torah, which is that God gave the Torah mipi hagavura, from the mouth of gavura. So here we think, well, wait a minute, we just said that there's 72 verses in Parshat Yitro to teach us that the giving of the Torah is the greatest kindness, the greatest loving kindness. And at the same time, though, we're told that the Torah is given through the mouth of Gevurah. And that we can understand because the verse that introduces the 10 Commandments uses the name Elokim and not the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Vayidaber Elokim et kol ha'devarim ha'ela lemor. And God spoke all of these things, saying, and then starts the 10 Commandments. So they termed this phrase that the Torah came from the mouth of Gevurah. So we would ask, what is the Gevurah that has to do with the giving of the Torah? So first of all, when we read the story of the giving of the Torah, there was thunder, there was lightning, there was the mountain was shaking, the physical phenomenon was of Gevurah. And so much so that after the first 2 commandments, according to tradition, every word that God said, the souls left their bodies because it was so awesome. It was so much energy that their souls couldn't stay in their bodies, and the souls just left their bodies, and that angels came and brought the soul back into the body. And then the next word that God said, again, the soul in the body couldn't handle it. And after the first 2 mitzvot, as it says in the text, the people came to Moshe and say, you talk to God because we're just too afraid. It's just too much for us. And you tell us what he said. So here we see again the unity of Chesed and Gevurah. Now, there's one more phenomenon of 72 that we will get to in about a month. And that is in Parshat V'ata Titzaveh. This is the Torah portion that has to do, at least at the beginning, with the clothing of the Kohanim, the priests in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. And I'm going to save it for then. I'll whet everyone's appetite. We'll see in the clothing of the Kohen Gadol especially, The number 72 appears a number of times. And it's very, very significant, the number 72 in the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. So here, just to end this section of our learning tonight, so we see that the number 72 appears in coming out of Egypt in the Exodus. It appears in the giving of the Torah, and it will appear in the creation of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. So we see there's like a process here that coming out of Egypt, receiving the Torah, and then making a dwelling place for God in this world are all connected by the number 72. They're connected by many, many other things. But here we're just concentrating on how 72 is going to appear in key places in the whole process of coming out of Egypt and creating a place for God in this world and a place that we can commune with God. So here, just to summarize, we see these tremendous allusions to the unity of Chesed and Gevurah. And of course, on a practical level, this is a very, very important thing, because if we live in a bipolar consciousness and we judge everything that it's either good or bad, it's either Chesed or Gevurah, it's either positive or negative. So our consciousness is a dichotomy, where we're always searching for, even though we're human beings, and sometimes that's simply how we experience different things happening to us. But the goal is to always be aware that it's always coming from God's goodness, even though many times we simply can't understand. Okay, so that's the first section. I'm sure afterwards we'll have what to discuss. Now, the next one is actually the first article in Beshalach, and it's called Questions and More Questions. So what we're going to do with the time allotted to us, we're going to pick a word. Now, this is very, very significant for learning Torah. What we just did was we took a number and we saw how the number 72 was, and actually the number 216, the numerical values of Chesed and Gevurah, that this becomes the linchpin in delving deeper into the Torah. That through a number that's going to appear in different places, and we start connecting the dots, connecting the numbers and their significance, from that we get all this incredible insight. Now, it's the same thing with words. If a word appears in one place and then in another and another and another, so commentaries for thousands of years start to connect the dots and try to see what is the connection of these words appearing in different places. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to take one word and we're going to try to trace it through this parsha, Beshalach, and also through the Haggadah of Pesach. Because of course, the Haggadah of Pesach is telling the story of coming out of Egypt. And one of the climactic moments of coming out of Egypt, of course, is crossing the sea and singing the song. So first, let's just discuss for just a minute or two the idea of questions. And why? Because the word that we are going to be analyzing is the word ma. Ma, what? A question typically begins with what. It could be with where and why and how. But what, as we're going to see, is a standard word in general and in the Torah for asking a question. And we're going to see that in this parsha, it's actually quite incredible how many times questions are asked in this parsha, and how many questions or different parts of the Haggadah incorporate the word ma. So first of all, there's an expression: the better the question, the better the answer. And we know that the entire Talmud is based on questions and answers. This is considered a top educational tool of how to learn, is through questions and answers. And I think we discussed this once, that there's a book called What's Bothering Rashi? And I think I shared that at one point when I was teaching Chumash to junior high and high school students. So I would always have them read the verse and we would translate. And before we would look at Rashi, I'd say, like right from this book, what do you think Rashi is going to comment on? Like, what do you see in this verse that is maybe needs commentary, needs clarification? So the method of questioning and answering, and of course we know in the Talmud, a question is asked and we'll get many, many, many different answers, many, many different opinions. And then if it's a matter of Jewish law, sometimes the Gemara will tell us this is what the law is. But many, many times there's discussions and it doesn't necessarily tell us what the conclusions are. And especially in what's called the Agadah, in we'll call it the stories, the parables, the allegories discussed in the Talmud. So we're not actually looking for a definitive answer. We're looking to analyze it, but it's always starting with a question. So I just want to share with you a couple of insights from Reb Shlomo about questions that he gave over in the Haggadah called the Carlebach Haggadah. And so he makes a number of comments. And his first comment is a very common one, that the value of giving people a permission to question is so critical, because I think we all know from different circumstances, if we're in a learning atmosphere and there is no permission to question, it's like frontal learning. You accept what the teacher says, you take your notes, you take your test, and that's what the learning is about. But we know that that is not a very constructive way of learning, is that the more the teacher or the atmosphere in the classroom or in the lecture or whatever it is allows questions, then the more people are open to receiving what's been given over. When we don't have the right or permission to ask, then it feels like we're being forced, we're being put upon. And that is not a constructive way of learning. And so by allowing questions, it avoids a lot of frustration, a lot of people getting turned off or shutting down, because at a certain point, people don't like being just lectured to. Now, obviously, we're not talking about every circumstances. There are certain times where we The teacher needs to give over what they have to give over. And afterwards, there can be questions. That's how we do this class, is in a certain way. I've asked for the permission to just be able to teach. And then afterwards, we open it up for discussion, disagreements, other ideas. And that's how it should be. So Reb Shlomo continues and says something very beautiful, that we all have questions. There's no one who doesn't have questions. And in fact, so many people get, in a sense, turned off to Torah, to God, to life, because they're not answers for everything. So Reb Shlomo says, when there is love, love, in a sense, allows us to live with the fact that we always aren't going to get an answer to our questions. And one example is two people are deciding to get married. Now, they could be madly in love with each other, but it's unrealistic to think that a person is going to go from a state of being single to making this huge commitment to another person. Hopefully children will follow, all the responsibility. And since none of us are perfect, who doesn't have some kind of question or doubt about who they're marrying? Rabbi Shlomo says that when there is love, we don't have to have an answer to everything. We don't need to have answers to everything. That love can overcome. So this is just a few general ideas. So let's go into what we're talking about. So first of all, we're going to start by trying to understand. One second. Try to understand where in the Haggadah did the creators of the Haggadah get the idea of incorporating questions as the format in which the Seder unfolds. And so in the Torah itself, we know that in the Seder, we ask the four questions. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh. And of course, for children, this is one of the first things that they learn and participate in a Jewish ritual, is for the children to ask the four questions. Ma nishtana, why is this night different? What is different about this night? And so this comes from, in the Torah itself, in three different places. Two are in this parsha, and one will come in the book of Devarim, where the Torah anticipates children asking about all the rituals of Pesach. And so the first one is from Exodus 12:26, where it says, and it will come to pass that your children will say to you, what is this service to you? What is this Seder of Pesach? What are we doing here? And of course, the Torah provides answers. Then in Exodus 13, verse 14, chapter 13, verse 14, and it will come to pass that if your child asks you in the future, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, with a mighty hand did God take us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And then a third time in the book of Deuteronomy 6:20. If your child asks you in the time to come, saying, what are the testimonies, the statutes, and the ordinances which God our God has commanded you. Now, these questions are incorporated in another part of the Haggadah, which is the 4 children. And we have the Chacham, the wise child, the Rasha, call him the evil child, but he's not really evil. The simple, the Tam, the simple child, and the child who doesn't know how to ask. Eino yodea lishol, doesn't know how to ask. But what's interesting, if you look in the Haggadah, so it introduces the 4 children, and then it says, Chacham, ma hu omer. What, again, the word ma, what does the wise son say? And he asks the question, ma edut v'achukim v'mishpatim asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu etchem. That's right from the 3rd question that we just quoted from Deuteronomy. In other words, the sages incorporated the questions into the questions that the 4 children ask. But it's interesting that it begins just like the 4 questions began with ma nishtana. Here it says, Chacham ma hu omer. What does the Chacham say? And then he asks a question. The same thing with the evil son. He says, Rasha ma hu omer. What does the Rasha say? Ma avodah hazot lechem. What is this service to you? And then it continues, the Tam. It says, Tam ma hu omer. What does the Tam say? Ma zot. What is this? Again, this is from the 2nd of the questions that the Torah itself incorporates in the text. Mazeh. What is this? And the last one, She'eino yodea lishol, so it doesn't say ma because he doesn't know how to ask. Later, right before we conclude the telling of the story, before we eat the matzah and the moror and all of that, so there is an important quote from Rabbi Gamliel, who says that a person has not fulfilled his obligation of telling over the story unless he mentions 3 things: Pesach, matzah, and moror. Pesach is the offering, the Paschal offering. Matzah is the unleavened bread, and moror are the bitter herbs. But what's interesting is that when it explains each of these, it incorporates the word ma again. So, for example, Pesach shayu avotenu ochlim bezman shebeit hamikdash kayam al shum ma. In other words, the Paschal offering that our ancestors ate at the time of the temple, for what was it commanded us? In other words, why did God command us to eat the Paschal offering? And then the Haggadah gives an answer. The same thing when it says matzah she'anu ochlim al shum ma. The matzah that we eat, for what reason? What is the reason? So again, the whole point here is the Haggadah, the 4 questions, the 4 children, and the 3 cardinal ideas that we have to mention to fulfill our obligation of telling the story all have the word ma in them. The idea of questions and then giving answers. So now we're going to go to our Torah portion. And we're going to see that this really may be one of the reasons that the sages incorporated this word ma so many times, because here we're coming out of Egypt and the word ma comes up over and over again. So we're going to start that when Israel leaves, for those who have Fruits of the Orchard, I'm on page 182 now, at the very, very top. So Israel leaves, and if you remember, they said we're going to worship our God for 3 days in the desert. Now, it should have been clear to the Egyptians that they were never coming back. But after 3 days, so the Torah says like this, I'm reading from the top of page 182. And Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart towards the people. And they said, what is this that we have done, that we have released Israel from serving us? So here, Pharaoh begins, he's the first ma here, is like, what have we done? Then they chase Israel, and we come to the sea. We're blocked by the sea. People don't know what to do. So it says, people are crying out, and it doesn't say explicitly, but it's implying that Moshe begins to pray to Hashem. So it says, God turns to Moshe, who is praying, and declares, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them move. But here the word I translated as why, but in the Torah it's ma. What are you doing by praying a lengthy prayer now? Now is not the time for a lengthy prayer. Tell the people to move. You need to move. And then the third time is that when we come through the sea and we go 3 days without water, and the people ask, what are we going to drink? And again, it's introduced by the word ma. So here, just 1 second. Oh, I skipped one of the mas. When we got to the sea, and it looked really, really bad. It looked like we were trapped. It was going to be a terrible, really a slaughter. So some of the people turned to Moshe and says, what have you done by taking us out of Egypt just to die in the desert? And it was like a pretty heavy accusation. Like, what have you done to us? So here, already in the beginning of the Parsha, we see different people asking questions, but each one has a different framework and a different meaning to it. And so what we can learn, and I'm going to make a general statement here. We began this segment by saying how positive it is to ask questions and how important it is to ask questions. But we know that there's always exceptions to every rule. And we know that if a person can ask a question in a very sarcastic way, a very cutting way, a very accusing way. So this is the other side of asking questions. And so here, with the people, when they say, what have you done to us? It's from a total lack of faith at that moment. We could understand it looked really bad, but they were accusing Moshe. And we'll see later in the parsha also, sometimes a question can be very accusing, and it's not really in the right place, or very sarcastic. When they crossed the sea, though, and they had no water, what's interesting is Moshe doesn't get angry at them. God doesn't get angry at them. God says to Moshe, sweeten the waters and give them water. It was a legitimate question. So already we have, in a sense, legitimate questions in the right tone. And that's why in the Haggadah, everyone comments on this. If you look carefully at the words of the wise son and the not such good son, they almost sound exactly the same. When you read the words, they almost sound like they're asking the same question. So why is one called wise and the other one is called somewhat evil? And so the sages picked up on the tone in which the evil son is asking the question. And truthfully, I don't like using the word evil, because he's at the Seder. He's there. He's part of the family. So, but he's asking the question in a very kind of demanding way, somewhat cutting, sarcastic, pessimistic kind of way. And that's why they label him as it were, as being evil, even though it almost sounds exactly what the wise son is saying. That's telling us how we'll call it body language or tone of voice or facial expressions can turn what might be construed as a constructive question into something quite different. Okay, next is one of the most important maz in the whole Torah. And this is when the people are complaining. And Moshe says to them 2 times, he says, V'nachnu ma. The nachnu, the we, what are we that you're complaining to? We are just God's messengers. You're really complaining about God. V'nachnu ma, what are we that you are complaining? We're just God's vessel. We're trying to fulfill God's will. We're trying to lead all of us to the Holy Land, to the Promised Land. Why are you complaining? So this statement, V'nachnu ma, is considered in Kabbalah and Hasidut the essential statement of humbleness and existential lowliness, where a person is devoid of ego and is trying to just express their lack of ego and their attempt to fulfill God's will. So this is such an important ma. It's quoted all over Kabbalah and Hasidut. But now let's take this and try to understand who said this. This was Moshe. If you look at Moshe's name, it's Mem Shin He, meaning the first and last letters of Moshe's name is Ma. So when he says, V'nachnu ma, what are we? He was truly expressing his very essence. That's why later in the Torah, in the book of Bamidbar, the Torah testifies that Moshe was the most humble person on the face of the earth. Now, this is quite a challenge to be a leader a type of leader who could lead the entire people out of slavery into the desert, survive for 40 years in the desert, and then lead them to the border of Eretz Yisrael. This is a leader like we need right now, basically. And yet Moshe's essence was Ma. The Shin in the middle is the fire of his soul to serve God. That's why God appears to him at a burning bush. The burning bush was, in a sense, a reflection of Moshe's inner essence. But that inner essence was tempered by an incredible level of true humbleness. So when Moshe said the Nachnu Ma, he was expressing his true essence. Now, we need to mention that the word Ma equals 45, and it equals the word Adam, the first human being, Adam. And we know that Adam was created in the image of God. And so this connection of Ma to Moshe is telling us that just like Adam was what's called a neshama klalit, an all-inclusive soul, Moshe also was considered an all-inclusive soul. As the tzaddik of the generation, he included within his soul a spark of every person in Israel. And that is being in the image of God. And so it's also significant that when you take the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and you do what's called the Miluim, you spell out the name with the letters being full. For example, if the name is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, and you spell it, the Yud, Yud Vav Daled, and you spell the Hey, Hey Aleph, and the Vav, Vav Aleph Vav, and the Hey, Hey Aleph, it equals 45, equals Ma. And that's why in Kabbalah, this filling of God's name is called Shem Ma, the name of Ma. So now we can understand at a much, much deeper level the idea of asking questions, because the word Ma in Hebrew means what, but it also means mahut. Mahut means essence, getting to the essence of a matter. And so here we're saying that the essence of Moshe is this idea of Ma, V'nachnu Ma. And his essence is connected to Ma because he's connected to Adam Arishon. And we're told that the name Adam, the three letters of Adam, excuse me, the Aleph is Adam, the Daled is David, and the Mem is Mashiach. But we also learn that about Moshe, Hua Goel Rishon, Hua Goel Acharon. He is the first Redeemer, and he is the last Redeemer. Moshe is the neshama of Mashiach. So this idea that the name Adam equals 45, equals Ma, and it's in the image of God, the filling of one of the name of God, one of the fillings, is equal 45, equals Ma. So when we connect these all together, this is very similar to those who were here from the beginning of the class, how we connected things to the number 72 by seeing that the number 72, excuse me, the number 72 appears over and over again, and by connecting the dots, we came up with deep insight. So that's what we're doing here with the word ma as well. Now, there's another manifestation of ma in this parsha, in the giving of what's called the manna from heaven, bread from heaven, food from heaven. In Hebrew, it's called man, mem nun. How did it get its name man? So the Torah says the people saw this food and they said, mazeh, like, what is this? And that's why they called it man. Because they said, mazeh, what is this? So this, in a very, very deep way, is connected to the whole matter of making a livelihood. Because in many, many people's lives, some of the biggest challenges, biggest questions is surrounding how am I going to make a livelihood? What should I do? What should I be? Where should I work? How long should I stay at this job? All of these questions are connected to the man. And the teaching of the man is that only enough fell for that day. We're told that if a person tried to gather more man than what they needed for themselves and their family, it would turn rancid. It would go bad. And so, of course, this is a tremendous teaching that God was trying to teach us, that the whole idea of making a parnasa, it actually says in the Gemara that making a parnasa is as hard as splitting the Red Sea. It's not an easy matter, and it's full of questions. So why did God do it? Why didn't God just give them enough for the whole week so they didn't have to, as it were, go to the store every day? Why didn't he give enough for a whole month? No, it was just enough for every day to teach us that ultimately the blessing of parnasa is coming from God. And no matter how good we are at our profession, no matter how great a business that we build, no matter how professional we get in whatever our particular job is, that ultimately we always have to know that the blessing of God is behind it. But again, here we have the whole concept of livelihood is called man, based on the word ma. The people ask, what is this? What is this? So that's another incredible connection. And like I said, the statement of the sages that making a parnasa is as hard as crossing the Red Sea. And this is connected. It's actually connected to more than this. Every morning, we end the first part of davening, Psuke de Zimra, with singing the Song of the Sea. Because every single day is a new challenge. Every single day, in a sense, we have to break through. We have to cross the sea. And we have to have trust in God that he will help us. But like God said to Moshe, like, what are you doing praying now? God is asking a question. What are you doing praying now? Now is the time for action. So God is even teaching him, like, obviously God is not discouraging us from praying, but God is teaching us that there are certain times where prayer is crucial, but ultimately we have to act. Ultimately, we have to. Having trust in God is wonderful, but we still have to do what's called our hishtadlut. We have to make our efforts, or we can't expect really things to happen. God depends on us to act, just like we depend on God to help us. God depends on us to put our trust into actual actions. I see that we're running out of time. There are actually a number of more maz towards the end of the parsha. This is on page 185 in Fruits of the Orchard. So again, Israel's out of water and they're complaining. So Moshe says to them, and they're quarreling with Moshe. And they said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moshe said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test God?" Moshe then cried out to God, saying, "What shall I do for this people? Just a little longer and they will stone me." But all the whys that I translated in the Torah is the word ma. So here we see also, we'll call this sometimes the existential questions that we all at different times a cry from the heart. It's a cry from the heart. Rabbona She'olam, why? And I can't refrain from connecting this to the events of this past Shabbat, and how many people, once they heard of the terrible attack that happened, didn't, in a sense, turn their eyes heavenward and ask a question. And I actually heard from my son that the I don't know his first name, but Rabbi Cook in Tveria, who's from the lineage of the first chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Cook. He's considered a tremendous tzaddik. That it was reported at Friday night. Now, obviously, he wasn't listening to the radio or the television, but in shul, apparently at a certain point, he said, "Rabbona She'olam, isn't it enough that 45 people died in Meron?" Now, 45 is Gematria Ma, by the way. And no one understood what he was talking about. Why on Shabbos, Friday night, which is very, very joyous, did he just all of a sudden say, "Rabbona She'olam, isn't it enough that 45 died in Meron?" And only after Shabbos, people understood, oh my gosh, somehow he tuned into it. Somehow he picked up on that energy at that moment. So here, this is Moshe. Moshe then cried out to God saying, "What shall I do for this people? Just a little longer and they will stone me." And this is going back, and this is how we'll end, that we all have questions, and we all have questions that really can't be answered. But as Reb Shlomo said, when we have enough love, then we're willing to live with the fact that we can't get all of the answers. And so many people in the world today turn their back on Torah, religion in general, and God, because there are real questions that we can't always understand. And too many people, when they can't get the answers, they end up, in a sense, being angry at God, and they walk away. But for people who have true belief, it doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it easy. We all have challenges that are not easy. But knowing that our love of God, of Torah, of Yiddishkeit, of fellow Jews, of humanity, then we learn to live with questions that we can't answer, and we go forward. So I want to give everyone a blessing. Giving everyone a blessing. First of all, halavai, all of our questions could be answered. But if not, we should have enough trust that maybe someday, maybe in the next world, maybe after Mashiach comes, but in the meantime, there's enough good in the world that I can get by without knowing everything. And so we'll just end that all of the souls that were taken from us this Shabbos should have an aliyat neshama, should be in some way we can't understand a sanctification of God's name. And those who are still injured should have a refuah shalema.